All right, welcome back to another week of the His Story on the countdown. Today we're doing Daniel part 2. So Christmas is right around the corner. We got a lot of things going on. I hope everybody's ready. But mainly, we only have a couple more sermons to do before we're done this part of the Old Testament and we go into Jesus' birth. And then we're going to take a small break there. So I want to kind of take a moment and talk to you guys for a second before we open this thing up. Next week we'll be doing Esther, and then Christmas, weekend before Christmas, we'll be doing Christmas Story, we're calling it. So we want you to partake in all that. Well, as once we get done that series, we're going to look to open up into the New Testament and continue the stories going. There's a lot in them. There's a lot to learn, and we want to continue that. But God's doing a lot of things in our lives, and we have a lot of things to look forward to and we need to take care of. So we're going to be taking a break, a small break. How long, I'm not quite sure yet. But for those that partake in the Wednesday evening Bible studies on the Facebook group, we will continue to hold those. Those will continue to happen. We may change them from Wednesday night to Thursday night. That's something that's still in the works, but you can still follow us there. But for the sermons itself, we're going to take a break till we get through the transitions that we got to go through. And then once we're done that, we'll be starting back up the sermon series. The sermons. And we may be coming in with the startup of maybe a prayer sermon series or something just to break the monopoly for a moment and then get back into the New Testament one. So make sure that you keep your eye out for that kind of stuff. But we have a couple more weeks here that we're going to finish this series off and then before the small break. But like I said, Wednesday nights on the Seeking Christ Fellowship group page, we will still be doing the live Bible studies. And we may even do a little bit more into that. Right now we're on number 20 of the 24 of the 25. 20. We're in the 20s, high 20s of the parables of Jesus, and we're doing about 33 of them, and then we'll be going into a prayer session on the Bible study. So make sure you, if you're not joining and you're not part of the group, go put Seeking Christ Fellowship in Facebook and join the group. And Wednesday nights, live feeds. So I got to open this one up with. So we'll kind of get into this one. Daniel, part 2. And our thought for this week is going to be grace and mercy from God create zero regrets by way of life. And that's shaping theology. So we went over Daniel 1 last week, and we're going to kind of refresh, kind of get up to speed here. But since Daniel 1, there's been a major promotion due to the interpretation of the dream that we finished off last week. So Daniel gets a pretty major promotion, and he's petitioning the king and set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of Babylon. And I am having trouble here with my eyeballs there. So, as we go over chapter 3, we see, hold on one second. All right, while I get those fixed. In chapter 3, it's up to 20 years that have passed from chapter 2. Chapter 2, we kind of went over everything, and Daniel interprets the dream, and then in chapter 3, it's roughly 20 years later. There's a lot of talk about this. Some scholars say it wasn't that much time passed. Some say it's 20 years. Some say it was maybe a little bit more. But when you look back, most scholars are saying that it's going to be a 20-year period because of what everything flows with it. So King Nebuchadnezzar remembers the dream, and he makes an image 70 and a half feet tall and 9 feet wide. Oh, you got them ready? Thank you. As long as I don't put my fingerprints all over them, I'll be all right. So King Nebuchadnezzar remembers the dream, makes an image 70 and a half feet tall and 9 feet wide. So he had all the council to come dedicated to it. And he made a decree, which we can find in verses 4 through 6 in chapter 3. So we'll read that real quick. It says, Then a herald cried aloud to you, it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony, with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the God image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. So at the time when all this happened, everybody bowed down when they heard the music, except for three: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You guys all know that story, right? Well, these three does not bow down. And we can look at it in so many different humorous ways, but seriously, they knew what was to come if they didn't. And we don't really get put into that much of an extreme of a spot, but what if we did? I want everybody here and out there to ask themselves, if that was you put in that spot, would you have bowed? Many of us could say, well, at that point in time, I might have needed to tie my shoe. Or at that point in time, I had a stomach cramp or something. May not have been a complete bow, but you wouldn't have been standing tall where everybody could see you. I know how we act. I know how we think. We may not want to bow and worship, but we wouldn't have wanted to be a sore thumb sticking up either. But these three just stood their ground. So Daniel chapter 3, 13 through 18 says this. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? In verse 15 it says, Now if you are ready, at the time you hear the sound of the horn, and when you hear all the music, and symphony, with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, then good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Now that's a bold statement. And it actually continues. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that the heat be turned up in the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. So the first part that we seen was he made a decree. But the king knew Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He knew they were good people. So what we read was he was giving them a second time. He said, look, when you hear it, just bow down. Otherwise, you're going to be cast into the fire furnace. But what was unique was he said, and who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? That's a little bit of a boastful saying right there. But we see that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had enough faith to understand where they stood. And they said, we have no need to answer you in this matter. That's rough saying to a king that's powerful, and a king that was giving you a second chance. And it says, if that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us. It didn't say he will deliver us. He said that he's able to. So what they're standing on, the faith that they're standing on, they are not sure if God's going to deliver them or not. But they have enough faith and enough trust in God to understand that whether he saves us or he does not save us, we will not serve your king or your idol or your image. And what if we could get to that much point, whether God uses us or God just throws us to the side? We're going to be loyal to him regardless. And that's hard for us. That's hard for each one of us to do that. So then it goes on, and Nebuchadnezzar has another incredible dream and interpretation in chapter 4. But actually, before we get to chapter 4, let's kind of continue. I want to jump to verse 28. It says, Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent the angel and delivered his servants and trusted in him, that they frustrated the king's word and yield their bodies, that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So we see all this. And King Nebuchadnezzar did not make this decision, this decree, because of what they stood up for. Remember, at the end of what we just read, in verse 18, it says, And he spoke and commanded that the heat of the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. They torched this thing up 7 times more than normal. And they bound all 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They bound their hands and their feet. And the guards that were thrown into the fires burned up and died. That's how hot it was. But Nebuchadnezzar looks in and he sees 4 people. And he asks the guards, didn't we just send 3 people in? Why do I see 4 and one looks like the Son of God's? Now your translations, some may say God, capital G-O-D. Some may say God's, G-O-D-S. And some may say other gods, or son of a god. But the correct interpretation is capital G-O-D, the Son of God. Nebuchadnezzar knew exactly who it was. So he calls them out, and they come out. Remember, just throwing them in, their guards died. They've been in there for a hot minute. Literally a hot minute. Anyway, when they come out, their hair's not singed, they're not burnt, their clothes aren't burnt. The only thing that was singed was the rope that bound their hands and feet. And they didn't even smell like smoke. And Nebuchadnezzar was just dumbfounded by this. And that's why what we just read from verse 28 to 30 came in play. That's why King Nebuchadnezzar made that decree. So in chapter 4, another incredible dream and interpretation. You guys can go back and read that on your own time. Excuse me. Let me get a drink. Chapter 5, a new king, Belshazzar, ruling with his father. And he was a piece of work. And then we'll read a little bit on that. So verse 5 of chapter 5, it says, In the same hour the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked against each other. That just means he's trembling. And then verse 9 says, the king Belshazzar was greatly troubled. His countenance was changed, and his lords were astonished. The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. The queen spoke, saying, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. There is a man in your kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy God. And in the days of your father, which is Nebuchadnezzar, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. Inasmuch as an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will give you interpretations. So down in verse 17 it says, Then Daniel answered and said before the king, Let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing to the king, and make known to him the interpretation. So King Belshazzar, not Belshazzar, Belshazzar, King Belshazzar, he was one of those kings where it was all prideful. And all these cups that they captured from Israel, all these really important that they got from the temple and everything, he was having a little banquet and he was using these cups. He wanted to drink out of these fancy cups. And that was a no-no with God. And that's why the handwriting went on the wall. So Daniel interprets the dream, and we're going to read that in verse 26. It says, This is the interpretation of each word. Mene, M-E-N-E, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Terel, or Tekel, T-E-K-E-L, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. And Perez, P-R-E-S, says, Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, king of Chaldeans, was slain. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So now, King Darius steps into the scene. I kind of missed the whole point of he had a God encounter. We just talked about that, so you can skip that slide. But Medes and Persians take over, and that's King Darius in chapter 6. So the council comes up with a decree for anyone who petitions any god or man for 30 days except the king be cast to the lions. Okay, Daniel is a Jew, and Nebuchadnezzar held him pretty high. And then Belshazzar brings him and holds him high. But now Belshazzar is slain, and a new king comes in. Well, the people in the town knew that Daniel was a Jew. They knew Daniel was worshiping other gods. So they talked to Darius and said, Hey, why don't we do this? For 30 days, anybody that petitions any other gods or man besides you, let's throw him in the lion's den. You're the only one that they can praise. So Darius, being a new king and all, says, sure, why not? So in verse 10 it says, Now when Daniel knew what was written, that the writing was signed, which means the decree, he went home in his upper room with his windows open toward Jerusalem. He knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before God, as was his custom since the early days. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplications before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? And the king answered and said, The thing is true, according to the law of Medes and Persians, which does not alter. So, They answered and said before the king, that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. I'm going to stop before we go to verse 15. Because what's happening here is the King Darius had a bond with Daniel already. We don't know how much time since he became king, but he has a bond. And now when he hears Daniel's the one that broke the decree, he was troubled. He was heartbroken. That was his friend. That was his person. That was his right-hand man. So when he wanted to deliver him, he was trying to all night long figure out how he can get around this decree because he can't break the decree. So he's trying to figure out how to get around the decree to save his friend. So in verse 15, then these men approached the king and said to the king, know, O king, that is the law of the Medes and Persians, that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke the saying to Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Which is fantastic, because Darius is setting up, and he's part of the Medes and Persians, but he knows. He says, Daniel, look, I can't save you. But this God that you serve, he can, and he will. So this is the faith that this new king has already. Then the stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the proposed concerning Daniel may not be changed. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musics were brought before him. Also his sleep went away from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve, continually been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. God was able to deliver him. But look at the prospect of King Darius. His faith saying, your God will deliver you. And then after he seals Daniel in, he goes up to his palace in his room, and he fasts. I mean, this king was serious. And the faith that you have in God, when the troubles and the circumstances in your life are bigger than what you can bear, your faith kicks in. And that's exactly what's happening to Darius. And if your faith doesn't kick in at that time, then you need to check yourselves. What are you doing wrong? Because that's when your faith kicks in. Some of us have trouble with our faith at that time. Some of us are too busy in the flesh trying to fix it instead of having faith that God can do it. The thing is, will he do it? God can do anything. But will he? And that's what everybody's facing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They knew God can and he's able to. They weren't sure if he was going to. Daniel, the same way, being thrown in the lion's den. But King Darius, the Medes and Persians, he had enough faith to know that God can, but will he? And the next morning, there is victory. So I'm going to go through a couple points here. First one is not called by God. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had this faith, and God never talked to them. But they still trusted in God regardless. Number 2, decisions based on trusting their theology. Remember, theology last week It's all about who God is. They trusted their knowledge of who God is and what he's capable of doing. Number 3 is willing to give their lives. Because if he wasn't willing to do it, they were still willing to lay down their life instead of denying their God. They stood on their belief of not turning on God, and we too face this every day in our daily lives. So I want to go over a couple scriptures, and this is going to be on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We have these on slides. Daniel 3:16. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. Verse 17. It says, if that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. And then verse 18. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the golden image which you have set up. That's some powerful stuff. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego laid it all out there. They said, if that's the case, we have nothing to say to you, king. Because our God can deliver us from there, if he wants to. But regardless, we're not going to worship you. We're not going to worship your idol. It's not who we are, and it's not what we're going to do. So, king, do what you got to do. Let's look at Daniel real quick. Got a couple scriptures on that one. So Daniel chapter 6, verse 10 says, Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since the early days. Let's go to 22. My God sent his angels and shut the lion's mouth, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Daniel knew what the decree was. He knew what they were signing. But what did he do? He went to his room and prayed 3 times that day. Because his only hope, his trust, and his life was always in the hand of God. And that's who he went to talk to, not the king. And then when it was all said and done, in verse 22, he goes to the king and he tells him, God sent his angel to shut the lion's mouth, because I was found innocent before him. O king, I have done no wrong before you. Just because I don't worship your gods, just because I won't worship your image, just because I pray to my God, I never did anything wrong to you. And that's where we got to stand. It's biblical truth. We should not sway away from it. Through our workplace, through our home, through the community, through the church, we have to stand on solid ground, on the rock of Christ. So, we're going to do the Daniel life as we close. Daniel life, number 1, direction is better than intention. Number 2, direction comes from theology. If you know who God is, then you know what you need to do. And number 3, theology comes from pursuing God. You don't know who God is because you're not chasing after him. We'll close this the way we open it. Grace and mercy from God create 0 regrets by way of life shaping theology. Grace and mercy from God creates 0 regrets by the way of life shaping theology. Because no matter what we do, in this life, as long as we're chasing after God, and as long as we're getting our theology and understand who God is, then we will have no regrets, even if it comes down to that moment. So I got for you guys this week. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, share it with friends and family, and always submit to the Word of God. Thank you, and God bless.